The dead bug is a remedial movement pattern that is effective to activate the core unit and bring a cognitive awareness to the client. Even though this movement pattern doesn't meet the criteria of human movement, it is useful as a basic strengthening exercise. Next, the supine hip lift is used to isolate the posterior chain, especially the lumbopelvic hip complex. Even though it is a concentric movement first, it has been proven effective for us. Quadruped isolates the posterior chain and helps strengthen the core unit. First, we start in the sagittal plane from 3 points of contact using an arm or leg driver. Then we progress to 2 points of contact using opposite arm and leg simultaneously to strengthen and promote stability. When there is adequate rotational motion, we will then progress to the transverse plane driver to eccentrically load the system. It is important that rotation is through the pelvis and thoracic spine. A more advanced supine hip lift is performing it with the frontal plane step out. The client must be stable enough to keep the hips extended and do this with no discomfort. If the client is able to perform the hip lift in the frontal plane and they have ample range of motion in the hips, then I progress them to the supine hip lift with hip rotation. It is imperative this movement pattern come through the hips and not the lumbar spine. Core stability with step out is next if the client has adequate hip abduction and rotation as well as range of motion in the foot and ankle. This movement pattern is designed to gain strength and mobility in the lumbopelvic hip complex while standing on one leg during gait and activity. Pivotal toe touch will increase range of motion in the foot and ankle complex and strengthen the hips. Triplane lunges are designed to increase range of motion and strength of the hips and lower extremities in all 3 planes of motion. When motion is gained in the foot and ankle complex, hips, and thoracic spine, this will reduce the excessive rotational motion in the lumbar spine. Warding patterns are used to gain stability from the ground up and top down when external forces are applied throughout the body. As your client strengthens and progresses, use different foot placements and tools such as a stability ball to change the tensional directions and tensional forces required through the body. Crossover walk is used to gain eccentric loading and range of motion from opposite hip to opposite shoulder in the anterior X-factor flexibility highway. TRX chest press improves shoulder girdle strength along the anterior flexibility highway. TRX lat pull develops shoulder girdle and back strength along the posterior flexibility highway in the sagittal and transverse planes. Crossover walk through the posterior X-factor increases range of motion and eccentric loading of the opposite gluteals and opposite shoulder girdle along the posterior flexibility highway. This movement pattern is used to gain eccentric stability during single leg stance phase of gait. TRX warding patterns increases ankle dorsiflexion and stability through the system during an unstable environment while external forces are applied. 2 sequences develop lower extremity strength during the preparatory movements to return to play. The racket adds upper extremity motion while loading the lumbar spine and central unit with various angles, lever lengthening, and drivers. The pickups increase the eccentric loading through 3 planes of motion while flexing and rotating through the hip and thoracic spine as the client works through the posterior flexibility highway and posterior X-factor flexibility highway.